Oh, right. Well, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, Marijke, because we've had so many conversations over about parenting and life coaching and bringing it all together. This is Marijke Ocean Joy Kemble, and she's a life coach and mindfulness instructor. And we are going to be talking about one of our favorites, Glennon Doyle, and her new book. And sort of aha you had as you were talking about an anecdote. And if you haven't checked out her book, I highly recommend it, or there's a great Brene Brown podcast as well. So if you're not in the reading mood. So before we get started, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and your kiddos?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. This is a super fun idea, and I'm honored to have been included. So I'm a mom to two kids, two girls, Marnie, who's 7 years old, and Olive, who's 4. And, before I became a coach and a mindfulness instructor, I was a business executive. I worked at a bank. I worked at a startup that was in the sales and marketing industry. And I felt sort of, certain that I couldn't hack a life of being home with my kids more when I was in those jobs. And I also harbored a lot of sort of secret and sort of hidden feelings about not being a good enough mother, not necessarily because I was working, but actually sort of believing I didn't have the skills to be a good mother. Like that wasn't in me somehow. And so it's been a really interesting journey to change careers, but then that's also sort of facilitated more space kind of gradually unfolding with my kids. And then of course with COVID, lots of space with my kids. There's a real like graciousness and sort of settling in that's happened now that's been a huge source of relief, and actually like sort of a surprise blessing of the transition that I've gone to, because I've let go of a lot of really hard, nasty things I thought about myself before. So so that's a little bit about me.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And thanks for being so honest in your reflection. I know sometimes it's hard to talk about mothering and the expectations we put on ourselves. And so I appreciate your vulnerability in that. So there was this one part of Glennon's book that really was like an oh damn, like come to this moment. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that excerpt for folks that haven't read it, and maybe what spoke to you.
Yeah. So I think I first heard her tell the story in an interview about the book. And then I've, more recently now that the book's out, read it in the book. And so, the scenario that she was talking about was she was trying to make a decision about her marriage in particular at the time. And she was sort of torn between what felt good to her and what felt good in terms of what she thought she should do for her kids. And what she realized, she was sort of, her daughter was getting ready for school and she was doing her hair, and her daughter was asking her to like do her hair, like do my hair like you do your hair, mommy, she sort of realized in that exchange for the first time how much our children look to us to understand what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a parent, what it means to be an employee or a leader or a business owner. Their understanding of what those roles are in the world is happening because they're looking at us.
Yeah.
And in that moment for Glennon, it was like a real sense of clarity that she was choosing to stay in her marriage at the time for her daughter, but she wouldn't have chosen that marriage for her daughter. She wouldn't have wanted her daughter to have the marriage that she was staying in. And so it was like this, all of a sudden that becomes in sort of stark contrast, like, oh, I need to choose what I would want for her.
Yeah.
In her grown-up life. And that is sort of the bigger obligation rather than choosing sort of, what I think is the right choice for her right now, or what, all those other things.
Yeah. Or the choice we're supposed to make.
Right. All those shoulds about like what is good for kids. So anyway, that just had a huge impact on me, because what happened, I wasn't necessarily in the midst of a crucial decision at the time that I heard that Glennon say that, but I have been in those crucial decisions before, deciding whether to change careers, deciding whether to leave. I worked at a bank for almost 15 years and I had a great career there. It was like a good enough job. Like, it was like, I want to leave that for all this risk and all this, all these other things. So it's like, I've been at those moments before, and what resonated to me about Glennon's story is this idea that it was sometimes means making the harder choice, but it's like living so that you're showing your kids what life you want them to have, rather than living it so that it's sort of safe and comfortable right now.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Thank you. So one of the things that comes up for me when you shared that is that you and I have talked about this before. There's so many shoulds in parenting, and so many things, and especially in motherhood, that you're supposed to do, or that and so there's this fine line, and the way you talk about this sort of mandate maybe that you heard for yourself is very empowering, right? Like this, like choosing the hard choices, but that are more aligned with your soul vision and your desires. But there's another sort of maybe shadow side of it, which is this shame, which is that like, if you're not doing that, or yet here's another thing I'm supposed to be doing as a parent and I'm not doing it, or, so if you could talk maybe a little bit more about that energy.
It can start out as almost like an oh shit moment, like I'm not, like, I had this weird dysfunctional relationship with my mom or my, whoever, right? That like, I am not really showing a good example. And then that can totally spiral into like judgment and shame and all this other stuff. So yeah, I mean, I'm inclined to mom guilt just as much as the next person. For whatever reason, I've thought a lot about why doesn't that happen in this particular, imperative or inspiration or, version of like, that's the way to live or something. And I think one of the things that's different about it for me is that it's like taking a little bit of a broader view about, I don't want to show them the perfect way to live a life because they can't always make the right decision. Like, I can see that clearly about them, like they're not always going to choose the perfect mate and pick the perfect job. Like, that's not possible.
Right.
That, people, your path is sort of, through the wilderness. It's like, you don't exactly know what each door is going to, have on the other side. And so that actually the standard I'm holding myself is not to like always making the right choice, but always being like willing to get back on my path. So that's sort of more the model, that rather than always have to need to like pick the thing that's super aligned or do the thing that's super true or always have to be living in my integrity. It's like, actually the better model is more like, oh, I got off my integrity and then I got back in my integrity, and then over here I like messed up, I messed it up over there, and then I got like back in my integrity. Like, that actually, that's the example I want to be setting, is like this constant, not in a constant, the way I just said that and the way it sounded a little like, but not like that, but just like, it's a constant checking in with like, is this your truth? Are you living your truth? And like, also your truth changes. Like,
yeah, right. That's
like when I picked that job in banking, like, I don't think I picked a lie. I think, when I was 22, my truth was different than when I was 35. Like, so I think that's sort of maybe the way to get out of that shame game about it, is like, almost like, expand out a little bit and say like, it's not about this choice. It's about how you move.
Yeah, it's right. It's almost like, to what I'm hearing, and tell me where I'm wrong, is like it's also your ability to take that step back and to pivot and to like, and to say like, oh, this is what I thought this was, but now here I am, and this is, this feels gross. And how do I get back? Yeah. How do I get back through the trees?
And also sometimes, a lot of times when we're in that point of like, oh, like all of a sudden you realize something's not for you, like big stuff, like a marriage or job or a relationship or something like that. Like you don't know what is for you.
Yeah. Right.
You just know this isn't for you. So like, I mean, that's just like, your kids are going to have that same experience too. Like, that's just like the way it is. That's
right.
So, so they need to see that happen to some degree,
Do you feel like being home with them now and sort of living it day to day with COVID-19 has, like, are there any specific examples that pop up to mind, or moments where you feel like you're sort of almost better, because we're facing so much uncertainty, you're sort of almost better able to model the concept?
Yeah.
Is that up to,
no, it's a great question. It's a great question. Let me think about it for a minute. I mean, I think that, it's funny. It's like we model for our kids and they model for us. Like part of what's coming to mind as it relates to COVID-19 is just like, it's just like one day at a time. Like if I think about like, what's the summer going to be like? And are we still going to be doing this in the summer? And can I go to the beach in the summer? And like all these other things, it's like, I start to like hold my breath and, get sort of worried about all the uncertainty.
Yeah.
But if I just sort of think about like, oh, like when are we going to have a chunk of the day today where we're all going to be together, and like, what are we going to make for lunch? And like, just like those kinds of, how can I make this thing we have to do, this homework or this schoolwork that needs to be done, how can we like better it a little bit? Like if I can just think about those sort of more present moment things, I don't feel that stress. And I think my kids are teaching me that as much as I'm teaching them that, because they're not like always projecting into the future. A lot of times they're just like, the next snack, the next whatever is like, it's just like right in front of them. So I feel like I can sort of honor like that mutual lesson about just sticking with like the next right thing, kind of. And that is a real, like, that's a real education and dropping into integrity for me. And I think it's probably also that way for them.
Yeah. Oh, I like that very much. And sort of on the opposite side of that, there's sort of this very day-to-day, like, what's the next right thing? And then there's also been in my house this amazing, like, because that we've lost structure, there's this like opening to things that I didn't even know my kids were good at. Like this, like much more, like, because we're sort of, I don't know, out in the field instead of in the woods of like getting from tree to tree. My older daughter has like been watching these every day with JJK animation classes, and she's like drawing things I didn't even know she knew how to draw. Like, and so this like opening up of who she is, that is like, honestly, I just like yesterday I was like, I don't know you. I don't know this part of you at all. Like with like such like pride.
Yeah.
Like, there's a whole new part of you that is just,
amazing.
like,
I love that.
gleaming.
Yeah.
Gleaming. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, it's funny. It's not quite as poetic as what you just shared, but I have been reflecting on just like how simple things like the kids participating in like the daily routines of running a household is so much easier to achieve when like the window of our togetherness isn't between like 3:45 when the school bus lets them off and like 8 o'clock when they're asleep.
Right.
Like when we have all day to like figure out like unloading the silverware from the dishwasher or something like that. Like it's just things like that are more possible. And
totally true.
And I do feel like there's a real, like, I've had that thought about my 7-year-old of like being like, oh my gosh, she can just do that by herself. Like I wouldn't have even thought to ask her to do that,
I totally agree.
So.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. My 5-year-old got mud in her hair and like went inside, washed her hair, and like came back out. And I was like, and changed her outfit, which wasn't related. It just needed to happen, apparently.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess so there's been this question going around, which is like, how do our kids gonna feel at the end? Like, what are we sort of leaving them with in terms of feelings at the end of COVID-19? And even going back to Glennon's book, like if you had your kids listening to our interview or thinking about these sort of things, what would you want them to take home from either this time or from this conversation?
Yeah, I guess the thing I most want them to feel or to have learned or to, you know, sort of that emotional learning that I want them to have from this time is like just that sense of like the inside of us, we all have this sense of like we can connect with a sense of spaciousness around whatever's happening. It's like we can have our moment where we, you know, wish we could have a sleepover with Papa, or we wish we could, you know, do these things that we normally do. And then we can also have like this space around that desire that's like, you know, snuggling with mom or playing with your sister or doing these other things. Like, and I actually think that is unfolding. It's like we can have the strong emotions about it, the positive emotions, the negative emotions about it. And we can also just like kind of keep showing up for each other and keep showing up for ourselves and just like, you know, keep going to the next meal and keep, you know, it's like really actually a beautiful lesson about just the normal turbulence that happens in life.
Right.
You know, except we get to practice it together. And we have a more shared experience, right? Like, you know, if you're sort of working during the day and your kids are at school, you're both having turbulence, but you're not necessarily having the same turbulence all day long, you know? And so there's something really nice about just sort of like, oh, there's peace in between the turbulence. There's a way to kind of be in it that we can get overcome by it, and then we can come back on track. And, you know, it's nice. And I hope that that's the way they feel. Their memory is of the spaciousness, not of the particular upset.
Yes. Oh, that's beautiful. And I really feel like that illustrated your role as a mindfulness teacher, but B, it really, I feel like, went full circle back to Glennon's story with, right? It's these like returning to the moments, and that in some ways, you know, whether it's a terrible day, your ability to recover the next day, that we're really helping our kids see their ability to navigate times.
Absolutely.
Our own resilience. Yeah,
absolutely. And they have it. It's like we all have it. It's wired into our DNA. I've loved this image, right, of like, in order for us to be alive at this moment, like our ancestors had to survive plagues and epidemics and wars and like and trauma and that, like, the fact that we even exist here today is evidence of how resilient we are, how capable we are of this moment in time. And I just think that is so beautiful.
That is, I just got goosebumps. So I will leave it there. Thank you so much for doing this. It was such a pleasure to talk, and I'm so excited that we get to share our musings with other people.
Thank you, Beth.
All right. Take care.